There's something deeply unsettling about witnessing cruelty in a place where kindness should be the norm, a place like a restaurant, where the simple act of greeting you with a smile sets the entire tone for your experience. Imagine walking into your favorite local eatery, craving not just good food, but a warm atmosphere where you feel valued and seen. Now imagine an elderly host, someone who's likely dedicated years of their life to this job, greeting customers with a gentle smile and genuine hospitality, being mocked and belittled by a rude customer in front of everyone. It's the kind of scene that makes you stop, feel uneasy, and question the humanity of those around us. But what happened next is the kind of moment that would make anyone sitting in that restaurant hold their breath, as the chef himself stepped up and responded in a way that absolutely stopped the entire restaurant cold. You're about to witness a story that's not just about disrespect, but about dignity, justice, and standing up when it matters most. And trust me, the chef's response will leave you stunned, inspired, and maybe even a little hopeful in a world that can feel too harsh. Now, before we dive into the full story, I want to make sure you stick with me until the very end, because the answer to why the chef acted the way he did and what it meant for everyone in that restaurant is something you won't want to miss. This isn't just another viral video of a customer causing a scene. It's a powerful reminder of respect, the quiet battles that happen behind the scenes in the service industry, and how one person's courage can change the course of a moment, or even a whole day. If you've ever worked in hospitality or simply care about how people treat one another, you're going to find this story hits close to home. And if you haven't, this will open your eyes to something most people don't see: the invisible strength it takes to maintain kindness in the face of disrespect. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll not only understand exactly what happened, but also why it matters so much to all of us. Let me take you into the scene as it unfolded. Picture a busy Saturday evening, the restaurant bustling with families and couples, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. The elderly host, a kind-faced woman in her 70s, stood near the entrance, ready to welcome the next wave of guests. She had been with the restaurant for over a decade, known by regulars for her warmth and attentiveness. But on this particular night, one customer entered with an attitude that was anything but friendly. He was impatient, loud, and cruel in his words, mocking the host's age and physical appearance in a way that shocked everyone around. The air instantly shifted from cheerful to tense. People paused their conversations, forks hovering midair, as the disrespect unfolded like a dark cloud over the room. The host's smile faltered, but she remained composed, trying to keep the situation from escalating further. And here's where things got really interesting. The chef, who had been watching from the kitchen pass-through, suddenly appeared near the front. He was a man known not just for his culinary skills, but for his quiet leadership behind the scenes. You might think that in moments like these, restaurant staff try to avoid confrontation, keeping peace to protect their jobs and customers alike. But this chef did something that no one saw coming, a response so measured, so powerful, it cut through the noise and made the entire restaurant stop and listen. What did he say? How did he say it? And what effect did it have on the rude customer and everyone else present? That's the mystery you're here to uncover, and I promise you, the answer is more impactful than you'd expect. This story also brings up themes we don't talk about enough: the hidden struggles of working in the service industry, the importance of respect across generations, and the quiet heroes who stand up for those who often don't have a voice in moments of conflict. It's easy to judge a rude customer as just a bad person, but what about the cost of their actions on the people around them? What about the resilience it takes for someone elderly to keep showing up every day, despite the challenges? This video isn't just about one incident. It's about what respect truly means in a society that often seems to lose sight of it. I want you to think about that as we move forward. Imagine the exhaustion that host must have felt, balancing her desire to serve with the pain of being ridiculed. Imagine the pressure the chef faced to defuse the situation without escalating it further. These are real people caught in a real moment, and their story deserves to be told. I also want to speak to you personally. If you've ever felt disrespected at work, or if you've ever been in a situation where you witnessed someone else being mistreated and didn't know what to do, you're not alone. We've all faced moments where standing up felt risky or impossible. But here's the thing. The way the chef responded that night shows that standing up with courage and dignity can change everything. That kind of bravery is contagious, and it's something we all need more of. So, as you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, what would I do in that moment? How do we create spaces where kindness isn't optional but expected? This video is not just a story, it's an invitation to reflect, to learn, and to act. Now, I'm sure you're wondering about the customer. What drove him to act that way? Was he having a bad day? Or is there something deeper at play? And what happened after the chef's intervention? Did the rude customer walk away embarrassed? Or did things escalate? And what about the other diners? How did they react to this sudden shift in the restaurant's atmosphere? All these questions will be answered, but I'm not going to spoil the ending just yet because the build-up is everything here. The tension, the anticipation, the raw human emotions, those are what make this story resonate. It's the kind of tale that you want to share, talk about, and think about long after the video ends. So make sure you stay right here, because every second counts. To give you a bit of background, this restaurant isn't just any place. It's a local favorite, known in the community for its family-friendly vibe and welcoming staff. The elderly host is practically part of the furniture, a beloved figure who's greeted generations of guests. The chef, meanwhile, is a passionate artisan, someone who believes that food is about more than just taste. It's about respect, connection, and creating a space where everyone feels valued. When you understand that, it makes his reaction all the more meaningful. This isn't just about handling a difficult customer, it's about protecting the heart and soul of the place. The story reveals how one person's actions, whether good or bad, ripple through a community, affecting everyone involved. As you listen, try to picture the emotions swirling in that room, the embarrassment, the anger, the solidarity, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to be broken by cruelty. The video will take you there, scene by scene, moment by moment. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why this story has touched so many people online, sparking conversations about respect, kindness, and standing up for one another in everyday life. You might even find yourself reflecting on your own experiences and thinking about how you treat the people who serve you every day. Because at its core, this story is a mirror, showing us what we are capable of in our best and worst moments. What most people didn't realize that night was just how much the elderly host had already endured in the days leading up to the confrontation. Her name was Margaret, and to most of the regulars, she wasn't just the host. She was the face of the restaurant. With her soft gray curls and floral blouses that changed with the seasons, Margaret was the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, asked about your grandkids, and somehow always managed to make a packed Saturday night feel like a family reunion. But lately, behind that practiced smile and gentle demeanor, there were cracks forming, subtle signs that something was off. Those closest to her had started to notice she wasn't quite herself. The brightness in her eyes had dulled ever so slightly, her posture a little more stooped than usual, her laugh quieter and less frequent. Most assumed it was just age catching up, but those who paid attention could tell there was something deeper weighing on her. And the truth is, Margaret was carrying a lot more than just menus and reservation books. She was carrying the emotional burden of a life unraveling behind the scenes. In the weeks leading up to the incident, Margaret had been grappling with a series of events that would have tested anyone's spirit. Her husband of 48 years, Frank, had recently suffered a minor stroke. Though he was recovering at home, the change in his health was a blow that Margaret hadn't quite recovered from. Between shifts, she was ferrying him to doctor's appointments, managing his medications, and handling all the little things he used to do without thinking, fixing leaky faucets, organizing mail, even driving her to work. Now it was all on her. Add to that the rising cost of everything, from groceries to medical bills, and Margaret had quietly picked up extra hours just to keep up. She never complained, never asked for sympathy. But beneath the surface, the weight of it all was beginning to show. She was stretched thin, emotionally exhausted, and yet still showing up to work 5 nights a week, greeting customers with the same warmth they'd come to expect. It was this quiet strength that made what happened with the rude customer so heartbreaking and so unforgivable. That night, The man who mocked Margaret wasn't a regular. No one recognized him. He came in alone, dressed sharply but with an air of entitlement that immediately rubbed people the wrong way. He barked out his reservation, though there wasn't one, and when Margaret calmly explained there would be a short wait, his demeanor changed. Loud enough for those nearby to hear, he made a cruel joke about her age, saying something about needing someone young and fast at the door, not grandma on her last shift. A few guests turned their heads, uncomfortable. One couple whispered to each other, debating whether to intervene, but chose to stay quiet. Margaret, always professional, simply smiled and offered him a seat to wait. But then he escalated, mimicking her voice, laughing at her slow movements, drawing attention with every word. It wasn't just rude, it was humiliating. What people didn't know at the time was that this man's behavior wasn't random. In fact, earlier that week, a woman had come into the restaurant during a lunch shift, a woman no one had seen before, who had a heated argument on the phone in the lobby before storming out. She kept glancing at Margaret while she argued, as if Margaret were somehow involved. It had seemed odd at the time, but chalked up to coincidence. Now, with this new man showing up and acting out so aggressively, it was hard not to wonder if there was some connection. Was this more than just a customer having a bad day? Could he have come looking for Margaret on purpose? And if so, why? Even more strange was the reaction of a young server named Kayla, who had been watching the exchange from the bar. As the man continued mocking Margaret, Kayla's face went pale. She looked like she recognized him, but not in a good way. She whispered something to a fellow server and hurried toward the back, disappearing into the staff hallway where the kitchen was located. Moments later, the chef emerged, calm but focused, wiping his hands on a towel, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the man at the host's stand. The timing felt too perfect to be coincidence. Had Kayla told the chef something? Had this man crossed a line in the past? The diners didn't know, but the shift in atmosphere was palpable. Something serious was about to unfold. The chef, whose name was David, wasn't known for making scenes. In fact, he rarely left the kitchen during dinner rush. But this time, something about the way Margaret stood there, silent, composed, yet deeply hurt, must have pushed him to act. And it wasn't just about loyalty to a longtime colleague. David had his own past, one he didn't talk about often. He'd once worked at a high-end restaurant chain in New York City, where a similar incident had happened years ago. Only that time, no one stepped in to defend the staff member. The fallout had been ugly. Lawsuits, firings, and a tragic breakdown that left scars David still carried. Since then, he'd vowed never to stand by in silence when one of his own was being attacked. But this wasn't just any staff member. This was Margaret, the one who brought him coffee on the nights he stayed late, who defended his culinary decisions to impatient guests, who never let anyone's bad mood infect the front of house. So when he saw her being humiliated, he didn't hesitate. But what David didn't realize, at least not yet, was that by stepping into the conflict, he was walking straight into something much deeper than a customer complaint. There were already rumors swirling around town, whispers that the restaurant might be bought out by a developer, that the owner was entertaining offers from a corporate chain looking to rebrand the place. Margaret, as one of the longest-serving employees, had access to internal discussions and old files that might have made her a threat to certain parties. And while it seemed like a stretch, some employees couldn't help but wonder, what if this man wasn't just rude? What if he was here to intimidate her? To silence her? Set the stage for something bigger? There was also another theory being whispered among the staff, one that introduced a whole new layer of suspicion. A few weeks before, Margaret had received a letter, delivered in person by someone she didn't recognize. She hadn't said much about it, only that it was from the past. Later that night, she was seen in the back storage room, sitting alone, looking shaken as she folded the letter and slipped it into her purse. No one asked questions, but it left an impression. The staff had speculated everything from a family feud to an old debt. What if the man mocking her was connected to that letter somehow? And what if this confrontation was the opening move in something much larger? As the chef stood face to face with the man at the host's stand, the restaurant seemed to freeze in time. Diners who moments earlier had been laughing over appetizers now sat in silence, their eyes flicking between Margaret, the customer, and the chef. Waitstaff lingered at the edges of the room, unsure whether to continue serving or stand by. Even the soft music that usually filled the space seemed to fade into the background. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Yet no one moved. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting to see what the chef would do. Would he confront the man directly? Would he ask him to leave? Or would he defuse the situation with some well-chosen words and steer things back to normal? Whatever happened next, it would shape not just the mood of the night, but the fate of everyone involved. And then, just as David opened his mouth to speak, the front door opened again, and in walked someone who none of the staff expected to see. A tall woman in a navy blue coat, with sharp eyes and a phone already recording in her hand. She didn't look like a customer. She looked like someone who had come with a purpose. Kayla's eyes widened as she saw her, and even Margaret seemed momentarily startled. Who was this new arrival? Why did she seem to know exactly where to go? And most importantly, was she connected to the rude man, or was she here for something else entirely? Just like that, the story took another turn. One that raised more questions than answers. And what happened in the next few minutes would not only reveal the truth behind the customer's strange behavior, but also shine a light on a hidden past that linked several people in that restaurant in ways no one could have predicted. As the tall woman in the navy blue coat approached the host's stand, everything about her radiated control, sharp features, confident stride, and a calm that unnerved even the most seasoned staff. She didn't glance at the guests or acknowledge the growing silence in the room. Her eyes were locked on Margaret. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice low but firm, her phone still recording by her side. Before Margaret could respond, Chef David stepped in. "Ma'am, can I ask what this is about?" he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she paused, then slowly turned off the recording. "Let's just say your hostess has been keeping some things hidden, things that involve more than dinner reservations." Her words were vague but heavy, and just like that, the restaurant's tension took on a whole new weight. Something deeper was at play, and now everyone in the room could feel it. Kayla, still hovering near the kitchen doors, exchanged a glance with one of the servers. They both knew something no one else did. Earlier that day, before the dinner rush, Margaret had gone into the office for a few minutes. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when she left, the filing cabinet that was usually locked had been left slightly ajar. Kayla hadn't said anything at the time, assuming it was just forgetfulness. But now, thinking back, she realized Margaret had looked disturbed, like she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Documents had been moved, and a file marked 1997, private, was lying open. Kayla hadn't dared peek inside, but she remembered the date. And that date meant something. It was the year the restaurant nearly shut down after a mysterious fire destroyed the old wine cellar. An accident, they called it back then. But everyone knew it was never fully explained. Now, as the stranger in the coat began questioning Margaret in hushed but intense tones, that old fire didn't seem so unrelated. And then, just as the tension reached its peak, a sudden crash echoed from the back of the house. It wasn't the clatter of dishes or a dropped pan, it was something heavier, more deliberate. The kind of sound that made your skin crawl. David took off toward the noise, Kayla trailing close behind, and what they found stopped them cold. The office door had been forced open, and inside, the contents of the filing cabinet were scattered across the floor. But that wasn't the worst part. The 1997 private file was gone. Someone had taken it. Security cameras? Of course, there were cameras. But when David rushed to check the system in the back, the feed for that section had gone black just 5 minutes earlier. Someone had wiped it clean or disabled it entirely. The timing wasn't just suspicious, it was surgical. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were looking for and how to cover their tracks. And more importantly, they knew the layout of the restaurant. This wasn't an outsider randomly poking around. This was someone on the inside. Someone who had been there long enough to understand the blind spots, the patterns, the routines. A traitor hiding in plain sight. Back in the front of the house, Margaret looked shaken but composed. The woman in the coat had stepped aside to make a call, speaking in hushed tones. No one could hear what she was saying, but her tone was urgent. When she returned, her demeanor shifted. "You need to be careful," she said to Margaret quietly, glancing over her shoulder. "There are people watching this place. And not just me." That line sent a chill through the air. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the hose stand. "Why now?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "After all these years, why is this happening again?" David returned, his face grim. "The file's gone. And whoever took it knew exactly what they were doing." Margaret didn't look surprised, just tired. Exhausted even. She nodded slowly. It was bound to resurface eventually. David stared at her. "What do you mean? What's in that file?" But before Margaret could answer, a commotion broke out at the entrance. A delivery driver, clearly agitated, stormed in holding a small package wrapped in plain brown paper. "Someone left this out by my van," he said, looking confused. "No label, no return address. Just said to bring it in here." Margaret hesitated, her eyes locking onto the package like it was a ghost from her past. She took it from the driver with trembling hands, slowly unwrapping it as the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Inside was an old, charred photo. The edges were singed, and the image was faded, but the faces were still clear enough to recognize. A group photo, staff members standing in front of the old restaurant before the fire. But what stood out most wasn't who was in the photo, it was who had been scratched out. One face had been violently defaced, and scrawled across the top in what looked like marker were 3 chilling words. "You were warned." No one said a word. Margaret clutched the photo to her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes welling with tears that refused to fall. David tried to take a closer look, but she stepped back. "Not now," she whispered. "Please. Not here." Kayla looked around the room and noticed something even more unsettling. The man who had mocked Margaret, the one who started all of this, was gone. No one had seen him leave. No one had stopped him. He had vanished sometime during the chaos, and not a single person had noticed. It was as if he'd been nothing more than a diversion, a distraction. And now, whatever they thought they knew was unraveling fast. Was the man in the dining room just a decoy? Was he sent to stir the pot, while someone else moved in the shadows? And most disturbing of all, what was in that missing file that someone would go to such lengths to erase? The truth was just beginning to surface, but every answer brought new questions. And as Margaret finally turned to David with a weary expression and said, "There's something I need to tell you," the front lights flickered, and then went dark. And just like that, the real story began. The restaurant was swallowed by darkness for only a few seconds, but in that brief moment, the world inside felt like it turned upside down. A flicker, a pulse, then a low hum as the backup lights kicked in, casting everything in a sterile blue glow that made the polished dining room feel more like a hospital hallway than a cozy bistro. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Diners murmured, servers froze mid-step, and Margaret stood silent, still gripping the photo like it held the last piece of her sanity. But the real storm wasn't inside the dining room anymore. It had already started moving outside, growing silently in the corners. No one was looking. Just 3 blocks away, in a tiny, cluttered apartment above a vintage record store, someone else connected to Margaret received a knock on their door that would upend everything. Her name was June, mid-30s, blunt bangs, and a habit of forgetting her keys, but never her camera. She used to work at the restaurant years ago, back when Margaret had first returned after the fire. June had been a server then, part-time photographer on weekends, full-time observer of things others ignored. She hadn't spoken to Margaret in nearly 8 years, not since she abruptly quit after a disagreement about a missing journal she'd kept in the office. Notes, photos, staff quotes, even a few rumors she had been collecting for a documentary she planned to release about the restaurant's rebirth. But that project never saw daylight. The footage vanished, and June had left, convinced someone had stolen it to bury something. Now, as she stood barefoot in her small kitchen with a cup of peppermint tea, that same sensation of something creeping from the past returned, this time in the form of a manila envelope slipped under her door with no name, no markings, just her address scrawled in messy handwriting that looked disturbingly familiar. Inside was a single USB drive and a printed note that simply read, "You forgot something." Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't hesitate. She pushed the flash drive into her laptop and a single folder opened, dated from 8 years ago. It contained raw video clips she hadn't seen since before the journal disappeared. But one file stood out. It was named Backroom, October 17th, uncut. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The grainy footage showed the storage hallway just outside the office, a shaky camera angle, probably one of the old wireless security feeds she'd tapped into. At first, there was nothing. Just shelves, boxes, shadows. Then a figure appeared, Margaret. She was talking to someone, but their face was turned away. The audio crackled, but the tone was unmistakably serious. June turned up the volume. "We had a deal," Margaret's voice snapped. "This was supposed to stay buried." The other voice was harder to hear, but it replied, "You're the one who kept the photos, Margaret. You should have destroyed them when you had the chance." That was all June needed to hear to know the fire hadn't been an accident. It was a cover-up. And now, someone was pulling the threads again. The problem was she didn't know who sent her the file, or why they wanted her to have it now. But they clearly wanted her involved again. Whether it was revenge, justice, or something more personal, she was now part of the story all over again. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Margaret still hadn't told David what she meant before the lights went out. She kept deflecting, retreating into her usual calm routine, insisting everything was fine. But her eyes gave her away. David knew something deeper was haunting her. So did Kayla, who had stayed behind to clean up the mess in the office. That's when she found something wedged under the desk leg, a torn piece of a burned journal page. Faint pencil marks still clung to the scorched edge, and in the corner, 3 initials were barely legible. JMT. She didn't know it yet, but those were June's initials. And this page matched the journal June had claimed was stolen all those years ago. Which meant one of two things. Either someone had taken June's journal and kept it hidden in the restaurant all this time, or someone else had been collecting the pieces, stashing them away like puzzle parts, waiting for the right moment to bring them all back together. Kayla tucked the page into her apron pocket, unsure of who she could trust. She didn't know June, and Margaret clearly wasn't being honest. And what scared her most wasn't the mystery of the missing file or the charred photograph. It was the growing feeling that someone inside the restaurant knew exactly what everyone was doing. Watching, listening, moving ahead of them at every step. And then came the phone call. David's phone buzzed in his pocket as he sat in the walk-in cooler, trying to make sense of everything. The number was blocked, but something told him to answer. A voice, distorted and low, spoke just 2 words before hanging up. Not her. That was it. No explanation, no name, no background noise, just a warning. Not her. He played it back 3 times, hoping for something more. But it only confirmed what he feared most. Someone was playing them all, pitting them against each other, turning truth into illusion. He had no idea who the message referred to. Was it Margaret? Kayla? June? Or someone else entirely? And just as he stepped out of the cooler, trying to decide what to do next, he caught sight of something new taped to the kitchen door. A single Polaroid photo, still developing, taped at an angle. It showed the host stand from earlier that evening, when Margaret was being mocked by the customer. But this wasn't from a security camera. It was taken from eye level, as if someone had been standing there, unnoticed, watching the entire confrontation. Underneath the photo, scribbled in red marker, was a single sentence. "This time we all see." The game had changed. And now, no one was safe. The next morning brought no clarity, only dread. David hadn't slept. Not really. He'd paced his apartment until the sun cracked through the blinds, replaying the distorted voice over and over in his head, that haunting message echoing like a warning bell just before impact. Not her. The problem was, the longer he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. It wasn't just that the warning was vague, it was that it came at all. Someone knew what they were all doing. Someone had eyes, ears, access. That Polaroid from the night before hadn't developed properly until nearly dawn. And when it finally did, David noticed something else. something he hadn't seen at first glance. Behind the customer who mocked Margaret, just barely visible in the reflection of the entryway mirror, was the outline of a hooded figure, standing completely still, watching. They weren't a guest. They weren't staff. And worse yet, no one at the restaurant remembered seeing anyone who looked like that. David drove to the restaurant in silence. He didn't even turn on the radio. Something deep inside him had shifted. A line had been crossed. It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was personal and dangerous. The building loomed at the corner of the block, quiet and still, the morning sun casting long shadows over its brick facade. But something felt wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, which was strange. Margaret was obsessive about locking up after closing. He pulled the handle and stepped inside. The air felt heavier, colder. As he made his way to the back office, his steps echoed louder than usual. The door to the kitchen swung open with a faint creak, and there, sitting in the center of the prep table, was another envelope. No writing, no markings. But this time, the flap wasn't sealed. He opened it slowly, heart pounding like a war drum, and what he found inside made his hands go numb. It was Kayla's necklace, the one she wore every single day. The small silver locket her grandmother gave her, which she never took off, even during her shifts. But there was something else. A small note, handwritten and torn along the edge. It said, "Stop looking or she won't come back." That was when David realized something was seriously wrong. He tried calling Kayla, but her phone rang and rang until it dropped to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Then again. Voicemail. The last time anyone saw her was when she stayed late to clean the office. She'd never made it home. And now, her locket was in this envelope, placed deliberately where only David would find it. Whoever was behind this didn't just want to scare them. They wanted control. They wanted silence. David's mind raced with fear, dread, guilt. What if she had discovered something last night and never had a chance to say anything? What if someone had been watching her too? The idea that she might have been followed, just like the hooded figure in the photo, wasn't just plausible now, it was probable. And yet, part of him still didn't understand why. Why now? Why dig up something from years ago? Why stalk staff, steal journal pages, and leave cryptic warnings? What secret was so dangerous that someone would disappear for even brushing against it? His thoughts spiraled, faster and darker. He remembered what Margaret had said to the man in the surveillance footage June had recovered. You should have destroyed them. That word, them, haunted him now. Photos? Files? Memories? Could Kayla have found more pieces of the old journal before she vanished? And was Margaret protecting the truth? Or was she running from it too? David stormed to Margaret's house without calling first. He needed answers. He pounded on the door until she opened it in her robe, eyes wide and red like she hadn't slept either. Before she could speak, he thrust the envelope into her hands. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice trembling with fury and fear. Margaret looked down at the locket, then back up at David. Her expression crumpled. "Oh God," she whispered. No, this wasn't supposed to happen again. Again. That one word confirmed David's worst fear. This wasn't the first time someone had disappeared because of the truth buried beneath the restaurant. But before he could demand more, Margaret backed away from the door, pale and shaking. "They warned me," she said, nearly inaudible. "They said if I talked, someone else would get hurt. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just played along." Her voice broke. David stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "What aren't you telling me?" he demanded. Margaret sat on the edge of her couch, hands trembling, lips pressed shut like she was trying to hold back the tide. "It wasn't just the fire," she said finally. "It was what happened after. Someone came to me with an offer. Keep the restaurant quiet about what happened, let the past die, and in exchange, they'd make the problems go away. The insurance would clear, no questions asked, staff would be rehired, business would thrive." And it did. But I didn't know what they wanted in return. She looked up, her eyes hollow. Until people started disappearing. David felt like the room was closing in. He didn't know what was worse, the fact that Margaret had kept the secret, or that the same thing might now be happening to Kayla. He stood, needing to move, needing to think. "We have to go to the police," he said. Margaret shook her head. "You don't understand. They won't find anything. They never do. And the more we dig, the worse it gets." The lights in her living room suddenly flickered, and for the second time in less than 24 hours, the power cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the space, and in that silence, they both heard it, the low, dragging sound of something moving outside her back door. David stepped toward the kitchen, heart pounding, and pulled aside the curtain. Nothing. Just the backyard fence, swaying slightly in the wind. But then a shadow moved, quick, deliberate, gone just as fast. He rushed outside, but no one was there. Only a new Polaroid taped to the patio glass, just like the one from the restaurant. This time, it showed Kayla. Her hands were tied. Her mouth was gagged. And behind her, out of focus but unmistakable, was a brick wall, one that David recognized immediately. It was the old storage cellar beneath the restaurant. Someone had brought her back. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. David stared at the Polaroid for what felt like hours. Every detail of the image seared into his mind like a burn that wouldn't fade. Kayla was alive, but terrified. The cellar. That place hadn't been used in over a decade. It was sealed off, or so everyone believed. But now, that false sense of certainty had cracked wide open. Margaret was trembling beside him, whispering prayers under her breath as though her words could somehow rewind time. David, on the other hand, had shifted into something else entirely. He was no longer just scared. He was enraged. Whoever was behind this wasn't just threatening them anymore. They were staging something much bigger, much deeper than a random act of intimidation. And suddenly, he realized something he hadn't before. The photo, its quality, its composition, was too calculated. It wasn't taken in a panic or from a distance. It was posed, framed, like a message, like someone wanted him to see it and react. He raced to his car, Margaret barely able to keep up, and sped toward the restaurant with one hand clenched so tight around the steering wheel that his knuckles turned white. But just as he reached the corner before the parking lot, a figure stepped directly in front of his car, forcing him to slam on the brakes so hard the tires screamed. It was June. Pale. Wide-eyed. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "You can't go in there," she said before he even opened the door. "They're watching. Right now. They know you saw the photo." David stepped out, his breath coming fast, chest heaving. "What are you talking about? Who's watching?" June looked over her shoulder like she expected someone to leap out from the shadows. "I couldn't tell you before. I thought I could protect you by staying quiet, but it's worse than I thought. Much worse." She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. This changes everything." They sat in David's car, windows fogged, air thick with the weight of truth about to be unburdened. As the footage played on his laptop screen, everything he thought he knew about the mystery began to fall apart. The security feed June had saved wasn't just from the front of the restaurant. It included footage from a hidden camera no one else knew about, one she had secretly installed in the prep kitchen after a strange incident 3 months earlier. What it revealed was shocking. The night the mocking customer had his accident and fell ill, it wasn't food poisoning or karma catching up with him. Someone had slipped something into his drink, deliberately. And that someone was Kayla. David recoiled in disbelief. He watched the video over and over again, praying he'd see it differently each time. But there she was, calm, calculating, watching the man as he laughed at Margaret, then carefully placing something in his wineglass just before returning it to his table. Margaret gasped when she saw it too, clutching her chest. No, she wouldn't, but the footage didn't lie. The date stamp matched. The angle was perfect. And worse yet, it wasn't the only time. There were 3 more clips, all from different nights, each showing Kayla alone in the kitchen doing something she clearly didn't want anyone else to see, rearranging storage, unlocking the old cellar, even disappearing into the back hallway with a second, unknown person whose face never appeared clearly on screen. That's when the pieces began to reassemble in David's mind, not the way he had arranged them before, but into something darker and more twisted than he'd imagined. What if Kayla wasn't just a victim? What if she had been a part of this all along? What if the photo of her tied up wasn't a cry for help, but a trap? A way to lure David back into that cellar, to make him act without thinking? His thoughts spun wildly, the ground shifting beneath him. Margaret was sobbing now, her whole body trembling. "She was like a daughter to me," she murmured. How could she? But David couldn't answer. He was too busy trying to understand how they had missed this. And that's when June delivered the final blow, the revelation that shattered what little remained of David's certainty. "The fire," she said softly. "It wasn't an accident. The insurance investigator was paid off. I didn't say anything because Kayla convinced me not to. She said it would ruin everyone's lives. But the night before it happened, I saw her arguing with someone in the alley, someone I thought I recognized but couldn't quite place. And now I know why. I saw him again 2 nights ago. Watching you." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice cracked. "It was your brother, David." The world tilted. Time seemed to slow. "No," David whispered, his throat tight. "That's not possible. Eric's been gone for years. He left the country." June shook her head. "He came back. Quietly. I saw him with Kayla, just outside the restaurant. They were close, too close." David's heart pounded so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Eric had always been the wild one, the manipulator, the one who could lie with a smile and charm his way out of anything. And now he was back, working with Kayla. And if that was true, then everything, the photo, the threats, the secrets, had been part of something much larger. Something orchestrated. But why? What did they want? And why now? The questions hung in the air like storm clouds ready to break. David looked up at the restaurant, then down at the flash drive in his hand. Every step forward now meant more risk, more danger, more truth that could destroy everything. And somewhere, down in the darkness of that sealed-off cellar, lay the answers he wasn't sure he wanted anymore, but that he could no longer ignore. Because the game had changed. And the people he thought he could trust were no longer who they claimed to be. David's hands trembled as he stood outside his brother's old apartment building, the one Eric used to crash it back before everything went sideways. The city buzzed behind him, indifferent to the chaos unraveling inside his soul. He hadn't been here in years, not since the fallout, not since Eric vanished without a trace, supposedly to Europe, supposedly to start over. But now that lie was dissolving like smoke in a windstorm, and all David had left was a flash drive filled with secrets, a memory of a sister-like figure who may have betrayed him, and the haunting image of his brother's silhouette beside her in a back alley. The thought alone made his chest feel tight. Still, he climbed the worn stairs one at a time, each creak beneath his feet louder than the last, until he stood in front of apartment 3B with a decision no sibling should ever have to make. Confront the brother he once loved or walk away forever and let the mystery consume everyone he cared about. He knocked. Once. Twice. Then silence. Just as he turned to leave, the door creaked open. A shadow stood on the other side, not Eric, but a younger man with the same crooked smile and that same dangerous glint in his eye, his nephew. "He said you might come," the kid said with a shrug, stepping aside to let David in. The apartment was almost bare, no pictures, no personal touches, just a mattress on the floor, a single chair, and a laptop on the table still glowing from its last use. David glanced around, scanning for any sign of Eric. "Where is he?" he asked. The kid didn't answer at first. Instead, he motioned to the laptop. "He left you something. Said you'd know what to do with it." David stepped closer, and the screen flickered to life. A video file autoplayed, Eric's face appearing on screen, calm and maddeningly smug. "If you're watching this," his voice began, "then the house of cards is starting to fall. I warned you years ago, Dave. I told you this town would chew you up if you got too comfortable. But you didn't listen." His tone darkened, smile fading. "Now I'm giving you a choice. You either destroy that flash drive and walk away, or everything comes out. Not just about Kayla. About Mom. About what happened that night at the old farm. Don't pretend you forgot. David's knees buckled slightly at the mention of the farm. That chapter of his past was buried so deep he barely allowed himself to remember it. But the guilt hit him like a freight train. Eric was using it now, leveraging the past, the unspoken, the things they both swore to carry to their graves. The ultimatum was clear: expose the truth and risk dragging everything into the light, including their darkest family secrets, or protect himself and the fragile peace he had built after so many years of pain. He walked out of that apartment more broken than when he entered. Margaret called just as he hit the street, her voice barely above a whisper. "David, it's Kayla. She's here. She just walked into the restaurant like nothing happened. She asked for you. She's waiting." His heart stopped. Kayla? Alive? Walking freely? And now asking for him? Every instinct told him to run in the opposite direction, to flee this nightmare and start over. But he also knew that running wouldn't undo anything. If he wanted the truth, if he wanted answers, then this confrontation had become inevitable. But what haunted him even more was the timing. Why now? Why, after all the warnings, the flash drive, the threats, the video, had she suddenly decided to show herself? Back at the restaurant, the tension was suffocating. Staff had stopped what they were doing. Customers whispered and stared. Kayla stood near the host stand, dressed in plain clothes, hair pulled back, hands folded like a child caught sneaking in late. She didn't look scared. She looked calm, controlled. David approached, each step feeling like it was pulling him deeper into a trap he couldn't yet see. "Why are you here?" he asked, trying to keep the shake out of his voice. She looked up at him, eyes glossy but strangely distant. "I don't have much time," she said quietly. "But there's something you need to understand. I wasn't working alone. I never was. And if you keep pushing, if you keep digging, someone you care about won't make it out of this." David's world spun again, her words like a dagger twisting slowly. The implication wasn't just clear, it was personal. Someone was in danger. Maybe Margaret. Maybe someone else. And for the first time, David realized the stakes weren't just his sanity or safety. The danger was spreading. The roots of this thing went deep, entwining around people he loved, lives he didn't think would ever be pulled into something like this. But now, his silence might cost them everything. And so would speaking out. He was at a crossroads with no good options. Walk away and live with the weight of unanswered questions, or confront Kayla and risk everything, his reputation, his safety, maybe even his life. But as she turned to leave, dropping a small key into his hand, the kind that only opened one thing in that building, the cellar door, David knew the moment for indecision was over. The truth was no longer something he could afford to fear. Because someone somewhere had just changed the rules of the game. And time was running out. David's pulse was pounding by the time he reached the cellar door. That old, rusted entrance beneath the restaurant had always been locked, mostly forgotten. Just another dusty relic of a building that had changed hands too many times. No one ever went down there anymore, at least not officially. But now, with Kayla's key burning in his palm and her chilling warning still ringing in his ears, David realized this wasn't just some symbolic gesture. Whatever she had led him to was real, tangible, and it was about to open the floodgates to something far more sinister than he'd imagined. He hesitated for only a second before slipping the key into the lock and twisting it. The mechanism clicked louder than he expected, like it was welcoming him into something he could never unsee. The air hit him first, musty and old, but with a strange chemical sharpness that didn't belong. He descended slowly, flashlight cutting through the heavy dark, illuminating shelves packed with paperwork, old kitchen equipment, and files he didn't even know the restaurant had. Then he saw it. 3 locked file cabinets pushed against a far wall, their faces marked not with restaurant records, but strange labels, investor correspondence, safety audits, and one that made his stomach turn, incidents. He picked the last one, hard in his throat, and began to pry it open. Inside were photos, not just from the restaurant, but from multiple locations across the city. Blueprints, receipts for equipment he didn't recognize, names of staff members, detailed records of people who had left suddenly, Stories everyone had brushed off as personal emergencies or relocations. But one name hit him like a lightning bolt: Margaret. There were notes about her movements, a copy of her application, surveillance photos from her first month on the job. David stumbled back, unable to breathe. Someone had been watching her, documenting her. And not just her, him too. There were references to his phone calls, emails he'd sent to corporate, even things he had discussed in private with staff members he thought were his friends. The walls felt like they were closing in as he came to a horrifying realization. This wasn't just about Kayla, or Eric, or even the restaurant. This was part of a system, a network of manipulation and control that ran deeper than he could grasp. Just as he reached for a folder labeled Internal Management Notes, footsteps echoed behind him. He froze. Looking for answers? A familiar voice said, calm and taunting. It was Chef Marcos, the one person David had trusted through all this. The man who stood up for him during the worst customer encounters, the one who told off the man who mocked the elderly host that started this whole spiral. Now his silhouette stood in the stairwell, backlit and unreadable. You weren't supposed to find this, Marcos said, walking down slowly. We had a system. You were doing fine until you started asking questions. That flash drive? That was your brother's mistake. He never could just let things go. David backed up instinctively, knocking into a crate. You were in on this? He asked, voice cracking. Marcos gave a slow, disappointed shake of his head. In on it? I built half of it. You think this is just a restaurant? It's a front. Always has been. The investors wanted full behavioral reports on staff. Test reactions. Monitor stress levels. See how far someone can be pushed before they snap. You were just a case study, David. A long one, sure, but one with a good arc family history. Conflict. Loyalty. Perfect profile for stress conditioning. David's legs nearly gave out. You're saying I was part of an experiment? Not just you, Marcos said, stepping closer. Most of the people here were placed. Some were actors. Some were real. We blurred the lines just enough to see who cracked and who adapted. You were adapting until your brother decided to pull you back in. David looked around the basement with fresh horror. It was all a lie: his job, his co-workers, the challenges, the praise, even the chaos from that entitled customer at the host stand. You watched me break, he whispered. Marcos nodded. And you're not the only one. Before David could respond, the lights above flickered. A low alarm started to whine from upstairs. Marcos stiffened, looking up. Well, that's new, he muttered. Looks like someone else is interfering now. He turned back to David, face suddenly grave. You need to go.
Right now.
I wasn't supposed to tell you this, but they're scrubbing this site tonight. Everything. Everyone. David's stomach dropped. Margaret, he asked. Marcos didn't answer. He just turned and ran up the stairs. David followed seconds later, bursting into a restaurant thrown into chaos. Customers had been cleared out. Staff were being herded into a back room by two men in suits. Margaret was nowhere in sight. Screens behind the bar flashed a warning message: system shutdown in progress. And through the front glass doors, a black SUV pulled up to the curb. David realized then that he wasn't just fighting to uncover the truth anymore. He was racing against something far bigger, far colder, and far more calculated than anything he'd imagined. And suddenly, all his questions came flooding back with one sharp, agonizing thought. If this had all been a setup, then what exactly was real? And how much time did he have left to find out? The wind howled through the broken front windows as David stepped into the main dining room, now eerily silent and stripped of all the warmth it once held. Tables were overturned, chairs scattered like remnants of a rushed evacuation. The red glow of the emergency lights gave everything a sickly hue, casting long shadows that twisted and danced with each flicker. In the far corner, where the soft jazz music used to play, now stood a makeshift workstation with servers, wires, and screens all connected to what looked like a central command unit. David's pulse surged as he approached, the flash drive Kayla had given him clutched tightly in his fist. This was it, the core. the nexus of whatever manipulation had ensnared his life and the lives of everyone around him. But even as he slid the drive into the console, his instinct screamed that it couldn't be this easy. Nothing had been easy. Not since the day Eric disappeared. Just then, the double doors to the kitchen burst open and Marcos emerged, not with panic or rage, but calm, composed, as if he'd been expecting this moment. In his hand was a remote, sleek and metallic, with a single glowing button at its center. "You're persistent," he said evenly, stepping closer. "You should have run when I gave you the chance." David didn't move. "I want answers. All of them. No more tests. No more riddles. Just the truth." Marcos laughed, bitter and slow. "You think you want the truth, but you have no idea how deep it goes. This place? It was just the entry point. A trial run. We were building something bigger: data collection, behavioral influence, real-time manipulation. And you, out of all the variables, were our most promising subject. Until your brother got involved." David's throat tightened. "What happened to Eric?" Marcos hesitated for a moment, then sighed, as if burdened by the weight of what he was about to say. "Eric figured out what we were doing, and he couldn't live with it. He tried to expose us. Said he'd go public. But he never understood the game. There's no outside. Not when everything you see, hear, and believe can be shaped from within." He lifted the remote slightly. "He's not dead. But he's not who he was anymore. We reconditioned him. Just like we were supposed to do with you." The words hit David like a sledgehammer. His breath caught, heart pounding with disbelief and horror. Reconditioned. That meant Eric could be out there, alive, stripped of memories, walking through life as a puppet of whatever sinister system these people had built. David took a step forward, fists clenched. "You're sick. You used people, families for experiments. You destroyed lives." Marcos smirked. "We gave them structure. Purpose. Look around you. This world is chaos. We offered control. And you're about to ruin all of it." With a sharp press, he clicked the button on the remote. Instantly, alarms wailed, the lights dimmed, and the servers began to overload. David sprang forward, tackling Marcos to the ground. The two grappled, fists flying in desperate flurries, as sparks shot from the electrical system behind them. Marcos was older, but stronger, his blows fueled by something deeper than rage, conviction. But David, driven by the image of his brother's hollowed-out eyes and Kayla's whispered warning, fought harder. With one final shove, he knocked the remote from Marcos's grip, sending it skittering across the floor. David dove for it, but just as his fingers brushed the edge, a voice echoed through the speaker system. Female, calm, and unmistakably artificial. Override detected. Emergency failsafe activated. The screens all turned blue, then black, and in a sudden burst, the server tower exploded in a shower of sparks, throwing David back and plunging the entire restaurant into darkness. When the dust settled, David lay on the floor, bleeding, disoriented, but alive. The only light now came from the flickering exit sign above the front door. Marcos was gone, vanished into the chaos, leaving behind nothing but destruction and a system teetering on collapse. David forced himself up, stumbled toward the terminal, and pulled the flash drive free. It was warm, but intact. Somehow, he knew the data was still inside, proof of everything. Of the lies, the manipulation, the lives taken and remade. As he stepped into the night, sirens began to wail in the distance. Maybe someone had called them. Maybe they were coming to clean up loose ends. He didn't care anymore. The truth was finally in his hands. And then, just as he reached the street, a car pulled up slowly beside him. The window rolled down, and David froze. It was Eric. But something was wrong. His face was calm, too calm. His eyes blank, like a man waking from a long dream. "Get in," he said softly. "We don't have much time. They're watching everything now. Even this." David stared in disbelief, heart racing. "Eric, is it really you?" Eric turned to him, and for the first time, emotion flickered in his voice. "Not all of me. but enough to know you weren't supposed to survive this. They wanted me to stop you." He paused, jaw tight. "But I remembered something they missed. Something small. Your birthday. You used to blow out the candles before the song was over." His voice broke slightly. "That memory, they couldn't erase it. That's how I knew I was still in here." David's chest tightened with a mix of relief and dread. "Then what do we do now?" Eric looked ahead, the shadows of black SUVs beginning to appear at the far end of the block. "We disappear. We use what you found, and we bring them down from the outside." He shifted the car into gear. "But you have to understand, David, this goes beyond us. The whole city's part of the test." And as the car sped away into the night, leaving the wreckage behind, David realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. They vanished that night, just as Eric had promised. No headlines, no police reports, no final confrontation splashed across the news. David and Eric went off the grid, trading in identities, burning every trace of who they once were. For months, they moved between safe houses, encrypted messages, and dimly lit cafes where names were never used. Each step forward brought more clarity and more horror as they unraveled just how widespread the manipulation had become. The servers they destroyed were only one arm of a much larger machine, one connected to corporations masquerading as wellness startups, government pilot programs cloaked in data privacy initiatives, and social media platforms that tracked users not just for profit, but for behavior modeling. It was a reality so terrifying it had to be true because no one would dare make it up. As they gathered evidence and built their case in the shadows, the weight of what they'd uncovered never left them. The keyword deepfake surveillance kept surfacing in anonymous leaks, as did phrases like predictive compliance and influence clustering. Every time David read them, he could hear Marcos's voice echoing, "There's no outside when everything you believe can be shaped from within." And yet, for the first time, David wasn't running out of fear. He was moving with purpose. He remembered the people who had warned him along the way: Kayla, who had vanished just days after giving him the flash drive, the old man in the alley who muttered about codes hidden in restaurant menus, even Detective Ramos, who had gone silent after hinting that his precinct was compromised from the top. Every one of them had paid a price for knowing too much, and David carried their sacrifices like a quiet drumbeat in the back of his mind. But what kept him going more than anything else was Eric, his brother, fragmented but slowly healing. There were still gaps in his memory, still moments when he seemed distant or triggered by something as innocent as a ringtone or a passing phrase. But the Eric who remembered birthdays, who knew David's laugh and hated olives on pizza, was clawing his way back into the light. And in that fragile, unspoken bond, there was hope. Eventually, they decided it was time to go public, not with a media circus or a viral video, but through a slow leak. David encrypted everything they'd collected and uploaded it to a decentralized platform, hidden in plain sight through trending keywords like neural data harvesting, AI behavior loop, and social engineering program exposed. The truth was now out there, buried in conspiracy forums, dark web archives, and even a few mainstream posts that got deleted almost as fast as they went live. But that was enough. Enough for people to start asking questions. Enough for the system to feel threatened. Enough for someone else to pick up where they left off. And that was the point. This wasn't a story about saving the world in one stroke. It was about lighting a fuse, letting it burn. 1 year later, David sat on a park bench under a sky that had finally shaken off the cold grip of winter. The cherry blossoms were just beginning to bloom, bright pink against the gray city skyline. Beside him, Eric quietly watched a group of kids play tag, their laughter unfiltered and real in a way that reminded them both of a time before algorithms tried to script everything. Neither of them spoke. They didn't have to. Their lives were still shadows of what they once were, but they had found something close to peace. Not because the world had been fixed, but because they had chosen truth over silence, action over fear. As a breeze rustled the leaves and a drone buzzed quietly overhead, David smiled. Not because he trusted the future, but because he knew he had helped change it, even if only by inches. Then, just as he was about to leave, a stranger sat on the opposite end of the bench, casually scrolling through their phone. Without looking up, they spoke. You did well. But this was only one node. The blood drained from David's face. He turned to look, but the stranger was already gone, melting into the crowd. And in their place sat a single slip of paper, folded once, and left where they'd been. David picked it up with trembling hands, heart pounding, breath shallow. On it was a single phrase: test phase complete. Next location, Austin. David looked up, scanning the faces around him. The wind carried the sound of distant laughter, car horns, a faint voice on a megaphone. It all felt normal, almost too normal. As he stood and walked away, he didn't know what would come next. But he did know one thing: the experiment wasn't over. It had only evolved.